People romanticize ownership. They see the freedom but not the headaches. They want to call the shots, but they forget that means every shot. Payroll, hiring, firing, Yelp reviews, the whole circus.
On the flip side, associateship gets treated like it's just a phase, like a layover before your real career begins.
Business side can be stressful, sure, but it's also a creative outlet. You get to shape the experience. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, that ownership is only about profit. It's really about agency.
What's your number one absolute worst part of being an owner in your experience?
That you're the captain of the ship. The issues, the difficult cases, the tough patient situations, that all comes to you at the end of the day. And if they're not resolvable by anyone else, that is. And, managing team member issues sometimes is way harder than managing an upset patient, because guess what? Those team members aren't just someone you see for an hour once a year. They're there with you every day. The question, when are you going to buy practice, is basically the dental version of when are you having kids? Basically, are you choosing freedom or fortune?
All right, welcome back to Project Confidence, where we take the time to talk about the things they don't teach you in dental school. I'm Dr. Diana Nguyen.
And I'm Dr. Amrita Patel.
Today, we're going to be talking about something that every dentist debates at some point. Should you stay an associate or should you take the plunge into practice ownership?
Basically, are you choosing freedom or fortune? And spoiler alert, it's not always the one you think.
So before we dive into numbers and pros and cons, let's talk a little bit about why we wanted to do this episode. Because this isn't just about money or ownership. It's about identity, expectations, and then what success looks like in our profession.
Definitely. I feel like the question, when are you going to buy practice, is basically the dental version of when are you having kids?
Exactly. Yes. And then it's usually followed up with the same sort of judgy, intrusive questions like, what's taking so long? And what are you waiting for? There's something like physically wrong with you that's keeping you from doing it. Always like, I am so relieved that you asked. I've just been dying to share this deeply personal information with you.
And there's this assumption that buying a practice is the natural next step, right? And I get why people say it. Owning a practice has always been the traditional marker of success. 30 or 40 years ago, that's how everyone did it. And for people like me who grew up watching their parents build something from scratch, it's ingrained and it's expected.
Right. But then for our generation and now this generation, and that's about to graduate, it's so much more complicated because students are graduating with higher debt and they're entering really saturated markets. They're juggling family responsibilities, facing a completely different healthcare economy. So the math isn't the same anymore.
Totally. And here's the other thing. People romanticize ownership. They see the freedom, but not the headaches. They want to call the shots, but they forget that means every shot. Payroll, hiring, firing, Yelp reviews, the whole circus.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the flip side, associateship gets treated like it's just a phase, like a layover before your real career begins.
Which is ridiculous. Some of the best dentists I know have no desire to own. They love what they do. They make great money. They go home without worrying about QuickBooks. That's not settling. It's smart in a lot of ways.
Exactly. So we wanted to unpack this whole conversation because it's not black and white. It's deeply personal. Your decision isn't just about your earning potential. It's about your energy and your priorities and then your definition of success.
And a lot of dentists think that there's no in between. It's either you have to buy a practice if you want real money or don't ever buy, it's too stressful.
Yeah. And then you're like, well, what if I want real money, but then I don't want my own practice? And then it's like, sorry to break it to you, but you chose a profession where these are your only two options. So stress from practice or stress from not earning enough. Just pick one.
So whether you're dreaming about being your own boss or you're perfectly happy as an associate, this episode is for you because we're breaking down freedom and fortune.
Because both paths can work beautifully as long as you understand what you're signing up for.
All right, let's dig in.
Well, let's start with some context. Amrita's background gives her a front row seat to what practice ownership actually looks like. So, Amrita, walk me through how you learned everything there is to know about owning a private practice.
I got really lucky because my dad learned a ton of ownership skills from his Columbia faculty when he was a resident. So the first practice he bought as a new graduate was already a group setup, the same one that we continue to work in today. I use the Chipotle analogy in my lectures all the time. Why does a Chipotle cheese quesadilla largely taste and look the same, no matter who makes it and no matter what state you get it made in? Because the emotion gets removed from the systems. The systems function in a logical line. And if someone calls out or three people are in training, everything is very repeatable. This is the principle on which we built our practices.
Meanwhile, I have been on that other side of that fence. So I've mostly worked as an associate, but in a lot of different environments. So after my GPR, my husband and I moved to San Diego in accordance with his military orders. And so my first job was a part-time gig in this very small capitation office that was mostly patients who had Denti-Cal, which is California's Medicaid dental program. So it was like an invisible DSO before we had the industry vocabulary to call it that.
Was that the one in the sketchy neighborhood?
You know how your apartment keys sometimes have the words like "do not duplicate" in really big letters etched into them?
Yeah.
So I get the sense that I could have gotten copies made of my "do not duplicate" keys by asking literally any person off the street in that neighborhood to do it for me, like in any of those shops or going to their garage or maybe out the back of their car.
Understood.
So then after about 6 months, I found a private practice job that started as 2 days a week, and then it slowly grew into 3 or 4 days, plus some weekends, depending on the schedule. And then there were the end of year rushes. And then I even covered the owner's maternity leave at one point.
You were there for a few years, right?
Yeah, I would consider that to be my first real job in private practice because I was around long enough to see my patients who came back for recall after I completed all of their treatment.
But that's not the job you had before you moved to San Francisco.
No. So after a few years, I got a job working in a multi-specialty group practice that was, like, interestingly enough, on a military base. So it was treating the families of Marines and other active duty service members, which actually turned out to be the best office I've ever worked on.
So basically, between the two of us, we've covered just about every angle of the owner and associate spectrum.
Yep. Okay, so before we get too deep into the pros and cons of ownership versus associateship, we should probably talk about how we built this episode and why that mattered so much to us.
Yeah, because let's be real, there's a lot of so-called career advice floating around on dental social media right now.
Oh, yeah, it's everywhere. I mean, I have noticed this huge uptick in dental influencers and coaches offering guidance on how to be successful and how to build confidence and scale your practice, buy your first office. And, like, honestly, so much of it sounds exactly the same.
100%. It's repetitive, it's superficial, and it barely scratches the surface. It's like know your worth, positive affirmations, work-life balance, work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. Okay, I hear that. But then how? What are the actual steps? Like, tell us what to do.
And you can tell people, or when people haven't actually lived what they're talking about, right? It's all recycled advice just wrapped up in a Canva template and a hashtag.
Okay, so here's where it gets super interesting and kind of scandalous. When we started prepping for this podcast, we obviously decided to do our homework and we looked at everything that's already out there, like what other dental podcasters and influencers and coaches were saying about how to succeed in dentistry.
And then we also went straight to the source that everyone's secretly using ChatGPT.
Yes, we literally typed in, give us the pros and cons of being a dental practice owner versus an associate. And then, like, hey, ChatGPT, what advice would you give to early career dentists about imposter syndrome?
And guys, I hate to break it to you, but the results were word for word what's plastered all over Instagram right now.
Oh, yeah, verbatim. We saw entire carousel posts and reels and even coaching videos that were charging hundreds or thousands of dollars to tell people the exact same list that we were able to pull off of ChatGPT in like 7 seconds.
Which is wild. Like, if you were going to charge people that much money, at least put a little originality into it.
Exactly. And we use ChatGPT too, but it doesn't replace experience.
Right. So when we sat down to build this podcast, we said, okay, let's not have ChatGPT speak for us.
Yeah, we wanted every episode of Project Confidence to come from real lived experience. So the lessons, mistakes, weird detours, and honest conversations that we've actually had in dentistry.
Because your time as the listener is valuable, just like ours is. You're busy. We're busy. The last thing you need is for us to read you something you could have asked an AI bot to give you on your own time.
So that's why we're doing this differently. When we talk about being an associate or an owner or any topic, really, we're not here to tell you what you should do based off our own singular experiences. We're here to share what it was like to go through it and what we've learned and how to think critically about your own next steps.
Exactly, because real confidence only comes from understanding yourself, not following someone else's script.
Amen. All right. Now that we've cleared that up, we can do a deep dive on one of the biggest career decisions you'll ever make.
Diana, you got some numbers for us?
Do I? Okay. I pulled some fascinating info from the ADA Health Policy Institute.
So a lot of people may not realize this, but one of the things that the American Dental Association does is it surveys and gathers data on the practice of dentistry all over the country so it can better understand its constituents and lobby to support the profession where it's most needed. And then that data is posted publicly for literally anyone to look up. You don't have to be a dentist to Google it.
Yeah. So in August 2025, they published updated numbers on the US dentist workforce. And guys, the shift is dramatic.
All right, hit us with the statistics, Professor.
So as of 2023, 72.5% of US dentists were practice owners. So that's a big drop from 84.7% in 2005. Younger dentists were especially steering away from ownership. So, for example, only 21% of dentists who graduated between 2016 and 2020 owned a practice about 5 to 9 years out of school. Compare that to over 60% for those who graduated before 2010.
So basically, our generation's saying, no thanks, I'd rather lease an Itero than a building.
Exactly. And then the gender gap is widening too. So male ownership dropped from 89% to 80%, and for women, from 68% to 60%.
That's actually not that shocking. A lot of women I know want flexibility.
I mean, I don't know a single dentist who doesn't value flexibility, to be honest.
True.
Yeah, so I tried to also find stats on average salaries for owners versus associates, but it's actually really hard to find and compare public data on income in dentistry because dentist earnings really vary widely by geography and then the number of hours they're putting in and the procedures that they do. And then also when they report average income for all the specialties, like when you see those charts online that show you like how much the average salary is for an orthodontist or oral surgeon versus a general dentist, people don't realize that those numbers also include what people make when they're in their residency programs, which can actually be less than minimum wage once you factor in the number of hours some of them are putting in when they're still technically in training.
So basically, the salary data is like all over the place.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, a lot of people think that ownership equals wealth, I think, but it's really not that simple anymore.
Yeah. So then, I mean, how do you know what's going to be better for you, especially if you're counting on wealth to pay down debt and then afford the life that you've always wanted? So, okay, Amrita, let's dig into your world for a minute. You've been in ownership for a while now, first alongside your dad, and now stepping into full ownership yourself. So, what's that transition been like?
Honestly, it's been a mix of terrifying and liberating. You go from having a safety net to realizing, oh, every decision now lands on me. But at the same time, it's incredibly empowering. I get to make the choices that define how my practice runs, how my team feels, and how my patients experience dentistry.
Okay, so let's start there. When you think about what makes ownership worth it, then what comes to mind first?
For me, I think it's the autonomy. As an owner, you're not asking permission to change a workflow, try a new material, or reimagine how your day is structured. You can design your clinical world exactly the way you believe in.
I mean, that must feel like a completely different level of creative freedom, especially for someone who's really intentional about patient care.
It is, and you're not just doing dentistry, you're building an environment that reflects your philosophy. Everything from how the front desk greets a patient to how long a hygiene visit lasts, it all aligns with your values.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of people imagine ownership as like just spreadsheets and payroll, but what you're describing sounds more like purpose and design.
Exactly. The business side can be stressful, sure, but it's also a creative outlet. You get to shape the experience. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that ownership is only about profit. It's really about agency.
Oh, I love that word, agency, because it implies power, but also responsibility. Okay, so now what have been some moments that made you think, yes, this is why I do it?
When I see my team growing, when a hygienist takes ownership of a new protocol or an assistant starts mentoring someone else, that's when I know that the culture we built is working. That's the part that fills me up the most.
So it's not just the clinical wins, but your leadership wins.
Exactly. There's this ripple effect. You realize you're not just treating patients, you're mentoring the people who will keep the practice and the profession moving forward.
That's such an evolved perspective. I mean, I think a lot of people view leadership as this sort of byproduct of ownership, but you're describing it really as the core of ownership.
Totally, absolutely. I've learned that leadership doesn't come automatically with the title of owner. You earn it through consistency, through how you show up for your team, and how you handle the hard days.
So then if you had to sum it up, then what's the best part about being an owner? Like not the most profitable, but really the most fulfilling.
That I get to create something that feels like me, a practice that reflects my values, supports my team, serves my patients well, and hopefully leaves something lasting behind. It's not about owning a business, it's about owning my path.
That's so beautiful. All right. So ownership is ultimately about creation.
Exactly. Ownership gives you the freedom to build the kind of dentistry and life that feels authentic to you.
All right. So we talked about the good parts of being an owner, but now give me the bad and the ugly parts that nobody wants to talk about. What's your number one absolute worst part of being an owner in your experience?
That you're the captain of the ship. The issues, the difficult cases, the tough patient situations, that all comes to you at the end of the day. And if they're not resolvable by anyone else, that is. And, managing team member issues sometimes is way harder than managing an upset patient because guess what? Those team members aren't just someone you see for an hour once a year. They're there with you every day.
And then what's something that you wish more people knew or prepared before deciding to become an owner?
The ups and downs, the great collection and production months and the not so great. It takes time to figure out your leadership style, the practice you want to run, the type rather, your schedule, everyone else's schedules. It doesn't happen overnight, but there is great help out there available to you should you need it.
Okay. So if someone were to come to you now and say, hey, I'm thinking about becoming an owner, but blank, what's the worst thing that they could say after that but that would make you go, oh, no, no, you should absolutely not buy a practice. You need to seriously rethink this.
I don't know if I have the time to dedicate to my business. You are a business owner. We are in the business of educating our patients and then guiding them through the process, investment to finish, of good oral and overall health.
Right. And then conversely, what are the signs in like your opinion that someone is absolutely ready to make the move from associate to owner? Like, what do you think? Should they have like X number of years of experience, X amount of money in the bank? I can't imagine that it's just about having the right mindset, but is it?
Mindset, focus, certainty, I'd say it's all of those things. Look, banks are going to want to see that you've got some savings, but they're also going to want to see your production reports at the associate position or positions that you're in. They want to know that you have the capability to replicate the production of the office that you're interested in purchasing. This is why it's so important to vet opportunities before diving in headfirst.
Yeah. One of the things I tell my students is that before you buy a practice where you're going to be completely flying solo, strongly encourage you to try to find a place where you're going to work somewhere long enough for some of your failures to come back and haunt you. And they might be clinical failures, like maybe a crown comes off or an endo that shows signs of reinfection, or they just might be patients who are concerned or complaining because they just don't like how something looks or feels, or even if they were totally happy and everything was fine on the day that you delivered it.
Absolutely.
The reason why that's so important is because you probably didn't see many of your patients in dental school come back a year or 2 years after something you did for them that needed to be fixed. And if you don't have a safety net, like a mentor or a partner that you can run to in those moments of panic, and yet that's some serious panic, then you've got to be able to manage all those complications with confidence because they happen when you're least expecting it. And then you've got other patients sitting in the waiting room and the Wi-Fi is down and the X-ray unit decides to stop working and the phone is ringing off the hook. And you have to be able to give directions to your entire team and move forward without having a complete mental breakdown.
Exactly. And these days happen to the best dentists with years of experience. So if you're not ready to handle all that completely on your own, along with all the responsibilities of running a business, then there's no reason to rush into ownership.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've talked about the highs and the lows of ownership, but let's flip this around. You spent most of your career as an associate, and I think that gives you such a unique lens. What have you loved most about being in that role?
I think the best part was that I got to focus entirely on patient care. And then I was growing my skills without administrative responsibilities getting in the way. So I'm not the one worrying about payroll or rent or staffing. Like I was just making sure that my patients were getting excellent care. And I was just continuously scoping out CE courses and other opportunities that could help me expand my repertoire of procedures.
Did you always feel like you had clinical autonomy?
Oh no, definitely not. In the practices that were struggling to figure out like how to effectively utilize their staff and to maximize production, there was definitely a push to get treatment done like as quickly as possible. Like, push for those elective procedures and then push for more production so you could be billing out like as many codes as possible per visit. So if I took extra time to try to get a patient who's like crying and being scared of needles and I wanted to get them more comfortable so they're like okay getting an injection, or let's say I wanted to help phase the treatment out and I agreed to accommodate the patient's work schedule or their school schedule, then I would get questioned about it. Like, what took you so long? I'm like, hey, you just pushed them to get it all done today.
That is so frustrating.
I mean, now that I'm like really far removed from those years, like I completely understand the owner or like the office manager's point of view. If you're staring down an upcoming lease payment or you have a schedule full of same day cancellations, then you're watching the associate let a potential crown prep walk out the door. That burns.
Sure, but we also have to make sure that we're doing what's best for the patient. And that might mean that you're foregoing a little production for that day.
Well, not everyone thinks the way you do, Omri.
Was there ever a moment where you thought, maybe I'll buy a practice, or was that never the plan?
Oh, it definitely crossed my mind a few times. I even took a few meetings with potential partners and owners who were looking to sell because I wanted to explore what that looked like. But my husband's military commitment meant that we might have to move every few years. And so I was really, kind of nervous about the idea of putting down roots in San Diego or anywhere else because I knew that I wanted to be able to go with him if his orders took him to like another state or even out of the country.
Were you ever like, if I need to become a practice owner or I need to so that I can make more money?
I think I felt the strongest pull towards ownership when I was working at practices that just didn't align with my own philosophies of care and where I felt like I was being taken advantage of or like I was a bad job of advocating for myself. So it was like, well, maybe I should look into ownership because I'm not making that much money and my job satisfaction is like abysmally low.
So then why didn't you?
Well, luckily, I found my way to a practice where the culture and the systems they had in place just totally clicked with my strengths as a clinician. And the support from the managers and their team members was impeccable. And the crazy thing was that I wasn't actually working that much harder or giving them more days. And yet my salary almost tripled.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was crazy. Validation that, hey, I'm not a bad doctor. I just needed to find the right practice environment and surround myself with the right support system to enable me to do what I do best. And then the income followed because all those things were aligned. So I guess the real takeaway from this experience is that if you're stuck in a practice that's like hampering your ability to perform at your best, and you need to keep looking for one that will enable you to shine, or just make the decision to build one that will.
Do you think you would have bought a practice if Joe hadn't been in the Navy?
I guess that's entirely possible, but then there's so many other things about our life that probably would have turned out differently if he hadn't served. And I honestly can't imagine what our life would be like today if we hadn't had all those experiences and met all those people that we did because the military sent him to San Diego. And so now it's like, I'm so thankful that I didn't buy one because if I had been anchored to a practice in San Diego, then I probably wouldn't have followed him to San Francisco and then gotten the faculty position that I have right now that's so central to my life's work.
In your opinion, what's the hardest part of not being the owner?
When you're not the owner, you sometimes have to work within a system that doesn't fully reflect your values or your pace. And you can have great ideas for workflow improvement or patient communication, but then you don't always get the authority to implement them.
Yeah, and I've seen that from the other side. I think I've hired and trained several associates over the years, and I've noticed something. The best ones aren't just clinically solid, they own their role, even if they don't own the practice. They think like owners, they lead by example, and they communicate with intention.
Exactly. And even though I think I knew that conceptually as a new grad entering someone else's office, it really took years to develop the ability to do those things because even as an associate, you still need to be showing initiative and tracking your own production and paying attention to patient retention because those habits make you indispensable wherever you go.
Totally agree. And as an owner, I want associates like that. I don't expect them to do payroll or negotiate supply contracts, but I love it when they ask smart questions, when they care about systems and team morale. It shows maturity.
It's mutual respect, really. When an owner gives you more space to grow, you give back by being intentional and proactive. And that's what makes the relationship work.
So, if you had one piece of advice, just one, to dental students or new grads who think they might stay associates indefinitely, what would it be?
I think the most important thing they need to know is that it's not a failure. If you never own an office and if the flexibility of being an associate, like in the right office, obviously, where you're being supported and respected, that's what enables you to do your best dentistry and it gives you space in your life for all the things that you want to devote your time and attention to, then be an associate for as long as you want. And then don't let other people's opinions about what your career should look like force you to buy a practice that you're either not ready for or not going to be happy about having to run at the end of the day.
So, freedom versus fortune. Turns out you don't have to choose between those two things.
Exactly. You can be fulfilled and financially successful on either path as long as you understand what drives you.
And at the end of the day, you need to know your whys, your goals, your lifestyle priorities, and then go do what makes the most sense for you.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what else? You can always reverse course. If you purchase a practice, but then realize after a while that it just doesn't align with who you are and how you like to practice dentistry anymore, you're not locked into it forever. You can always go back to being an associate or pivot in your career and explore other options.
Some of which we will be talking about right here in future episodes of Project Confidence.
Stay tuned for more conversations about that. And thank you for listening. So until next time, bye.